This is Black Power 96.3 FM. Right now, we have our weekly political study by Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, Omali Yeshitela. Today, we'll be speaking on a new page in world history. You can watch live on Facebook or also on YouTube on the Burning Spear TV. Here is Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Today's study, a new page in world history, is chapter 4 of the political report to the Third Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. It was published in book form as Israel Letu e Africa, and Israel Letu e Africa is Kosa for Africa is our land. It is a slogan that was popularized first by the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania and adopted also as a slogan of the African People's Socialist Party and the African Internationalists internationally. This political report was made in September 1st, and for the Congress that lasted September 1st through the 8th, 1990. For a lot of people, and perhaps most of our audience, 1990 was a very long time ago. And the events that were roiling the world at that time are not commonly recognized, understood in the front of the memory bank of most of the people who are participating in this discussion, I'm sure. But it's really important. And it's also important that I say to you that this study, like so many other studies, and particularly most recently, has to do with revolutionary theory, revolutionary history. This was written, presented to the Congress barely a year before the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which at the time was a premier power in the world. It came into being after the Russian Revolution in 1917. That was led by V.I. Lenin, and a sector of what had previously been the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party in Russia. And a split had emerged in that organization that led to the emergence of a genuine revolutionary sector that was characterized as the Bolshevik. And they became known as the Bolshevik Party, or the party of Lenin. And I'm mentioning this because we will reference Lenin in this presentation. But I think also it's really important for me to say to you that our objective here is to really develop a revolutionary worldview and help people to understand the science of revolution, the science of society. We live during a period where more and more people are attracted to political activism because of the contradictions that we find ourselves confronted with. And we are also living during a period where there is minimal understanding of the science of society, that there is no recent tradition of a revolutionary organizing, a revolutionary theory. And ours is the African People's Socialist Party. We are distinguished by a philosophy, a worldview that we call African internationalism. It is a worldview that was informed by theory. It is a worldview that was informed by how we have come to understand the material forces, that the forces in the world that shape, mold, inform the trajectory of societies themselves and the role that human beings play in this process and the leading forces in this process. I think that's really important because, as I mentioned earlier, more and more people are being attracted to some kind of political activism, but it is an ill-informed kind of activism. It is an activism in the African community where we find more and more people who have described ourselves as Black people who are upset because white people don't treat us right. And we're trying to find a way, many of us, to get white people to treat us right or to get the government to treat us right without having an understanding effectively of who white people are. And I'm not talking about superstitions and the kind of superstition that passes as science that characterizes white people as some kind of mutants, or the kind of superstition that calls white people some kind of devils, because we're not a religious organization at all. We're materialists. We recognize that that the society itself is motivated by material interests of human beings in society, and key to that is the interest in reproducing life, producing life, and reproducing life. That is the fundamental basis of all human activity. All human society revolves around the struggle to produce and reproduce life. It is more important than religion. It is more important than what people refer to as culture. It is the thing that this process of producing and reproducing life is the basis for the emergence of religion, for the emergence of what we characterize as culture. Because without life, you have no religion, no culture, no anything. So we also recognize that society is comprised of two fundamental components. One being an economic base. That is to say that all societies have to create a means by which they sustain themselves. This is generally recognized as the economy of society. How communities, how societies, how groups sustain themselves. And when you look at how societies sustain themselves, then you can have an understanding of why societies have different kinds of ideas, why they think certain things, why the political institutions look and act a certain way. The fact is that so we have the material basis that revolves around how society sustains itself, the actual methods and processes through which human beings go and acquire what it is that we need to survive as societies. And then stemming from this, we have a superstructure. And the superstructure you can see in the ideas that in that society. You can see it in religion. You can see it in the political institutions and things of that nature. The ideological basis, the ideology of society has its origin, its genesis in the economic base of society. So you have a material basis in how society organizes itself to create and recreate life, how it sustains itself, how it goes about creating food, clothing, and shelter, on socially creating food, clothing, and shelter. And then stemming from this, you will find ideas that not only reflect that reality, but reproduces the attempt to reproduce the capacity for this economic base to continue functioning in the service of that society as defined by the social group that is dominant and that has most power, which is essentially the same thing. So we are materialists, and materialism is a worldview that helps us to understand that that society can be understood, just like like any other phenomenon. Society can be understood in a scientific manner. We don't have to guess how different social groups will act. We don't have to try to base our judgments on how society is moving based on whether somebody is good or whether they are bad, or whether they are evil, as they like to say in this country, or whether they are good, as the white people in America like to understand themselves to be. We don't have to understand society based on whether someone made a good speech or a bad speech, or anything like that, based on whether there was a king that was significant or insignificant, based on there are other phenomena at work in society. And this is what helps us to understand. We understand the basis of society. We understand what it is that makes the society function the way it does. Then we can understand what we see when we look at different aspects and features of society itself. Excuse me. You know, not too long ago, the U.S. Successfully sent a space vessel to a planet, Jupiter. And they said Jupiter is on the far reaches of the solar system. It is, and people were asking the question, why would someone spend so much money, time, genius to get a vehicle to go, a space vessel to get to Jupiter? What is the benefit? Well, Jupiter, as I mentioned, is suggested to be at the edge of the end of the solar system. And the basis for going to Jupiter was to find out about what is happening here and now in the world. It is assumed that getting to Jupiter gives the ability, provides the ability to understand how the entire solar system came into being. And so getting to Jupiter was very important. It was not just a waste of money from the perspective of the people who are dominant in society and who effectively control much of the world. And the same thing is true for us, that we look at the science of society. We investigate the history of how we got to be in this situation, not just to be able to tell stories, not just to be able to win arguments in a barbershop or in our fraternity houses or something to that effect, but because this, if we know how we got here, if we know the origin of this contradiction, then we are better informed about how to struggle against the contradictions or to resolve the contradictions and to win our freedom, our liberation as a people. So we are a revolutionary organization. We believe that there is a science of society that can be understood, and that we have a responsibility to understand the science of society in order to formulate a strategy, in order to formulate a politic that will take us from this place of colonial domination and terror and humiliation that African people live with on a daily basis to our freedom, to a new world. And we believe that once you have this society, this science of society, that one is able to predict in general terms the future, the outcome, that freedom is on the horizon. And we talk about this all the time because when we talk about a crisis of imperialism, it is a statement that recognizes that the last 400 or 500 years of human history has been the history of imperialism, the history of white power dominating the rest of the world. When we know how this came into being, and we recognize that it is responsible for our domination, for our poverty, for our humiliation, for the divisions that we see in Africa, for the drone strikes, for the police murders in our communities here and around the world, we understand this, then we can forge a means to overcome it and to win our freedom. And we have an understanding of what freedom looks like. So we can make a prediction now because we see its weaknesses. We see the weakness of the system that came into being through our oppression, that is maintained through our oppression. And because of this, we see this weakness. We're not frightened when we see this house shaken. We're not frightened by it. In fact, what we're doing is looking to see what other means that we can provide that would contribute to not just a shaky foundation here, but bringing the entire thing down so that we can have our freedom. Of course, in order to do this, we have to recognize that our freedom is dependent upon the destruction of the social system that came into existence through enslaving us, and that is maintained through our enslavement, our humiliation, and the rest of that. I wanted to say that because I think it's really important. We're not just having a discussion for the sake of having a discussion, but to understand the nature of the society, to understand the kinds of contradictions that exist in the world, and what it's going to take to win our freedom. This is different from going to Egypt every year or however many times to study the pyramids and etc. It is different from simply going around making speeches. I'm trying to inform a revolutionary party, a revolutionary movement, because it is up to us to overturn our oppression. And this is not going to happen by good speeches or anything like that, but by an army of thousands of millions who have become cadre, who have become informed, who understand the science of society, what our tasks are, and who are made passionate because of this understanding, not just because we are angry because of the last slight that we experienced at the hands of a white oppressor. I'm going to begin, and we're starting on page 47. And this is chapter 4 of Izwe Letu Africa, the political report to the third Congress of the African People's Socialist Party that was conducted in St. Petersburg, Florida from September 1st through the 8th of 1990. As I mentioned, this was about a year before the former dissolution of the Soviet Union and the emergence of the reemergence of what we now recognize as Russia. And I think understanding this can help to understand a bit of what's going on today when you look at how Russia is in the headlines as far as a relationship with the United States. So I'm going to read a lot, and I really want you who are participating in this study to be open to raising questions and issues coming from the study. I recognize that, again, that much of what we're talking about is not like a period in the 60s and for time in the 70s and even briefly in the 80s where revolutionary theory was being discussed in what constituted a movement. Many of the forces, the organizations and personalities of significance during the period that we just mentioned no longer exist. Some of them were killed outright by the government. Some of them were jailed and chased into exile. Others of them simply did not have the wherewithal, either ideologically, politically, or otherwise, to stay the course of revolution. And the party, the African People's Socialist Party, having a history of more than 50 years, especially when you include the fact that we see our immediate origin in the actual political struggles of the 1960s to now. We have the benefit of having developed during this period where so many others, for whatever reasons, are no longer with us. So I'm on page 47, which is the beginning of the fourth chapter under the title of A New Page in World History. So please don't hesitate to raise questions because you are not alone in terms of not being familiar with a lot of what's being discussed. Today, we are experiencing an epoch in which a new page is being turned in world history. It is an epoch which is being mischaracterized as an epoch of failure or crisis in socialism. This mischaracterization is due to the open collaboration between what has until recently been considered the leadership of the international socialist camp, namely China and the Soviet Union, and the US and the disintegration of the so-called Soviet bloc. While imperialist ideologues and some so-called leftists have been rejoicing, and many other leftists have been demoralized and confused by this so-called crisis of socialism, we African internationalists in the African People's Socialist Party have understood that what is being characterized as a crisis of socialism is instead a crisis of imperialism. Instead of confusion, demoralization, or collaboration with this parasitic system, we are experiencing a new determination to defeat imperialism based on the ever-increasing validation of our theory. We have always said that those who saw the fundamental struggle in the world as existing between the minority white workers and bosses of the world were mistaken. We have always said that the essential class struggle in the world does not exist between the white workers and the white ruling class, but is actually concentrated in the struggle against colonialism and economic dependency. Indeed, whether he knew it or not, Marx inferred as much himself when in part 8 of Capital he wrote, and I quote, "In fact, the veiled slavery of the wage workers in Europe needed for its pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World." The veiled slavery of the wage workers in Europe needed for its pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. This statement by Marx is simply another way of saying that capitalism, the entire basis and superstructure of white power as it exists, has its origin in and rests upon a pedestal of African oppression. Other statements in this same work by Marx makes this point abundantly clear, and I'm quoting Marx. "We have seen how money is changed into capital, how through capital surplus value is made, and from surplus value, more capital. But the accumulation of capital presupposes surplus value. Surplus value presupposes capitalist production. Capitalistic production presupposes the pre-existence of considerable masses of capital and labor power in the hands of producers of commodities. The whole movement, therefore, seems to turn in a vicious circle, out of which we can only get by supposing a primitive accumulation, previous accumulation of Adam Smith, preceding capitalistic accumulation, an accumulation not the result of the capitalist mode of production, but its starting point. This primitive accumulation plays in political economy about the same part as original sin in theology. Adam bit the apple, and thereupon sin fell on the human race. Its origin is supposed to be explained when it is told as an anecdote of the past. In times long gone by, there were two sorts of people: one, the diligent, intelligent, and above all, frugal elite; the other, lazy rascals, spending their substance and more on riotous living. The legend of theological original sin tells us certainly how man came to be condemned to eat his bread in the sweat of his brow. But the history of economic original sin reveals to us that there are people to whom this is no means essential. Never mind. Never mind. Thus it came to pass that the former sort accumulated wealth, and the latter sort had at last nothing to sell except their own skins. And from this original sin dates the poverty of the great majority that, despite all its labor, has up to now nothing to sell but itself, and the wealth of the few that increases constantly, although they have ceased to work. Such insipid childishness is every day preached to us in defense of property," unquote. In another place in part 8 of Capital, Marx further explains what this primitive accumulation is, that preceded capitalist accumulation, but that was not the result of the capitalist mode of production, but a starting point. And I quote, "The discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, signalized the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. These idyllic proceedings are the chief mementa of primitive accumulation. On their heels tread the commercial wars of the European nations and with the globe for a theater. It begins with the revolt of the Netherlands from Spain, assumes giant dimensions in England's anti-Jacobean war, and is still going on in the opium wars against China. So we're looking at what has been characterized as the primitive accumulation, the startup of accumulation, how the whole capitalist system was begun. And if we see nothing else, we see here in this passage by Marx is that the whole startup of the capitalist system, which we can characterize as the rise of white power, has to do with, first of all, slavery, the enslavement, the capture of African people, the turning Africa into the warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. It has to do with the opium wars being made against China. It has to do with the whole attack on non-white peoples around the world. I'm going on page 49. Marx's Capital was written in 1867, but 20 years previously, in 1847, Marx had made the same point about the primitive accumulation that was the origin of capitalist production as it actually occurred in the world. In a work called The Poverty of Philosophy, Marx reveals the historical significance of Africa in the emergence of capitalism, not only for the accumulation of pre-capitalist capital, but also for the origin of the capitalist world economy, the existence of which was also a precondition for the rise of capitalism. And I'm quoting Marx again. Direct slavery is just as much the pivot of bourgeois industry as machinery, credits, etc. Without slavery, you have no cotton. Without cotton, you have no modern industry. It is slavery that gave the colonies their value. It is the colonies that created world trade. And it is world trade that is the precondition of large-scale industry. Thus, slavery is an economic category of the greatest importance. Without slavery, North America, the most progressive of countries, would be transformed into a patriarchal country. Wipe North America off the map of the world, and you will have anarchy, the complete decay of modern commerce and civilization. Cause slavery to disappear, and you will have wiped America off the map of nations, unquote. In the last paragraph quoted above, Marx attributes American progressiveness to African slavery. Moreover, Marx also makes the most coherent and cogent argument of what it would take to destroy capitalism or modern commerce. However, Marx was not able to concede that the struggle to overturn the pedestal that the veiled slavery of the wage workers in Europe needed was the fundamental revolutionary task for the defeat of capitalism. Let's see this again. However, Marx was not able to conclude that the struggle to overturn the pedestal that the veiled slavery of the wage workers in Europe needed was the fundamental revolutionary task for the defeat of capitalism. This is because Marx's theory requires that the defeat of capitalism occur as a consequence of a contest between white workers and the white ruling class. It has been left to us, African internationalists, whose enslavement constituted the origin of modern commerce, to identify within the struggle in our own self-interest the basis for the defeat of capitalism and the rise of socialism. We have written more about this in the past, not only quoting Marx even more extensively, but other theoreticians and historians who have also researched and exposed the origin of capitalism, some more so than Marx. The significance of this research is its usefulness in exposing that the fundamental contradiction, the resolution of which would result in the historically based advent of socialism, has never existed between the industrial, which is to say white working class, and ruling class. The real locus of the class contradiction in the real world exists in the contest between capitalism born as a world system and the pedestal upon which it rests. Hence, the 1917 revolution in Russia was not a true socialist revolution since the real historical basis for socialism, which is destruction of the pedestal upon which capitalism rests and which is required for its existence, had not occurred. What happened in Russia in 1917 was the existence of conditions which constituted the political basis for socialists to seize state power. So the historical basis for the advent of socialism did not exist, but the political conditions for socialists to seize power existed, and that's not the same thing. However, this seizure of state power by socialists did not change the reality that the world economy, even the world economy within which Russia existed, was and continues to be a capitalist world economy. It is the same world economy created by the slave trade and augmented by other facets of parasitic or primitive accumulation that transformed the vast majority of the peoples and countries of the world into great reservoirs of human and material resources, largely for European and North American exploitation. Through the capture of state power, socialists in Russia were able to effect some immediate changes in the lives of Russian Soviet peoples. Immediately, they were able to pull Russia out of the terrible First Imperialist World War. Although the Russian people would suffer imperialist-supported civil war and actual imperialist invasion, which caused immeasurable human suffering and economic damage. The Russian Revolution also resulted in the destruction of Tsarism, or Russian feudalism. The great feudal estates of the Russian nobility were seized, and this facilitated the ability of the revolution to address the starvation, oppression, and land deprivation of the peasants. Jobs, education, healthcare, housing, and a major thrust towards industrialization contributed to a rapid transformation of the conditions of existence for the Russian people. However, the massive resources poured into military industry necessary to protect the socialist state from a hostile capitalist world placed great limitations on what the overall productive capacity of the country and the socialist state could do for the people. The main contradiction, however, continued to be the existence of the capitalist world economy. The victory of the Russian Revolution resulted in the near absolute ostracization of Russia from participation in the world economy. While the capitalist world economy had the benefit of the captured resources of the bulk of the peoples and countries of the world, the so-called world trade that is the precondition for large-scale industry, Russia found itself essentially isolated. This fact meant its economy would quickly run into its limitations, stagnate, and actually regress as long as capitalism held sway worldwide. The growing successes in the struggle for national liberation are what has opened up this new epoch we are currently confronted with, the epoch that capitalist pundits and white nationalist leftists would mischaracterize as the epoch of socialism in crisis. In the main resolution to our first Congress held in 1981, we correctly characterized this epoch even before specific features such as the capitulation of Russia and the Soviet bloc had become clear. Here's what we said, quote, "The struggle of the world's peoples for national liberation, political independence, and economic and social justice have been going on for a long time, and they have clearly escalated since the Second Imperialist World War. However, the new current in the struggle of dependent countries and peoples, the current characterized by the struggle against neo-colonialism with a few critical exceptions, represents a new epoch in the struggle against world capitalism led by U.S. imperialism. This new epoch is characterized by the struggle against neo-colonialism, which embraces all those countries which have won the struggle against colonialism for political independence, and by the struggle against economic dependency, which embraces the peoples and countries which suffer from the neo-colonial oppression, as well as the people who still strain under the cruel weight of colonialism or political and economic dependency. This epoch of struggles and victories over neo-colonialism and dependency became most notable and best defined by the revolutionary triumphs of the heroic peoples of Cuba, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Most recently, our courageous sisters and brothers in Angola, Mozambique, Ethiopia, and Grenada, And the heroic peoples of Iran, Nicaragua, and El Salvador escalated this process in a critical way, throwing world capitalism led by US imperialism into an economic and political crisis from which it is desperately attempting to rescue itself, and which clearly determines the domestic policies of US and Western European imperialist powers. So we see we listing many of the same countries that we are confronted with. We see the U.S. and the imperialist powers being confronted with today, except the crisis has deepened even more since this was written in 1990. This epoch of struggles and victories over neocolonialism and dependency represents the leading revolutionary tendency in the world today. Let me say that again. This epoch of struggles and victories over neocolonialism and dependency represents the leading revolutionary tendency in the world today. It is an epoch which finally thrusts humanity upon the threshold of world socialism, for it challenges the very foundation upon which world capitalism is built. This epoch of struggles and victories over neocolonialism and dependency directly threatens the primitive and non-capitalist accumulation of capital upon which world capitalism was constructed and without which it cannot survive in its present form. During the period when the struggles against colonialism represent the main current in world history, the imperialist powers fell back on neocolonialism as the form for maintaining the oppressive exploitation of the world's fighting peoples and their resources. While colonialism reveals itself as the direct foreign political and economic domination of a people, neocolonialism disguises this domination by allowing nominal political independence. Under neocolonialism, imperialist rule is indirect and is carried out by indigenous imperialist puppets who administer a country, government, and people for the imperialists, who are able to continue indirect political domination through control of the economy. This form of exploitation allows imperialism to maintain a stranglehold on the world's peoples and their material resources. It also allows imperialism to stabilize its domestic rule during times of crisis through conceding more services and material benefits to workers within the imperialist center at the expense of increasingly brutal oppression and exploitation of the colonized, neo-colonized independent peoples. And this speaks volumes about the situation that much of Europe, including the United States, find itself confronted with now. Because typically, historically, the imperialists have been able to pay off the workers and our population in the colonial centers and the capitalist centers by simply expropriating more, exploiting more of the workers and oppressed peoples and countries. Today, the struggle against imperialism has become so generalized that's increasingly difficult to do. Everywhere we look in the world, people are rising up, and it is hard to milk more of the resources of the people today, much harder than it was when this was written. This epoch of struggles and victories over neocolonialism and dependency increasingly narrows the profit-making and political options of imperialism. It is an epoch of struggle which has thrust humanity upon the very threshold of a world struggle for socialism. It is an epoch of the ascendancy of the slave, one which characterized the world situation as generally good, unquote. White socialist theory marginalizes Africans. Before the advent of African internationalism, most communists held the view that socialism, the early stage of communism, where the state continues to temporarily exist as the workers in arms, would occur as a consequence of the development of internal contradictions within the industrial capitalist countries. It's important for us to understand that before we came around, before African internationalism, most of the communists put forth the view that socialism, which is the early stages of communism, where the state continues to temporarily exist as the workers in arms, would occur as a consequence of the development of internal contradictions within the industrial capitalist countries. This Eurocentric view which marginalized the vast majority of the world's peoples, ascribing to us historically subordinate and auxiliary roles, saw as primary the contest within the white minority population of the world. So the primary contradiction from typical Marxists and so-called communists saw the main contradiction in the world as existing within the centers of the imperialist countries themselves. The workers in Germany against the rulers in Germany, the bourgeoisie in Germany, the workers in France against the bourgeoisie in France, the workers in England against the bourgeoisie in England, the workers in America, meaning white workers, against the ruling class of the bourgeoisie in America. That's how they described the primary contradiction in the world. And we have profound differences with them, and African internationalism represents that difference. However, this theory offers no explanation for how those of us whose misery constitutes the pedestal of world capitalism would ever be relieved of our wretched role. So when you look at this and you look at the explanation they've given us, okay, so the workers in France, now they seize power and they have a worker state in theory. What does that do for all of the colonized peoples, even in the countries in Africa that are controlled by France? How does that change the balance of power? What does that do for us? This fallacious view even prevented the Soviets from understanding why they continued to have economic difficulties, which were theoretically only associated with capitalism. Thus, in the ideological war with the international bourgeoisie, the Soviets, in order to prove the superiority of what was being called socialism, hid the economic crisis, economic contradictions within their system, and eventually became demoralized and perhaps even corrupted by failures they apparently did not fully understand. In explaining the success of the Russian Revolution of 1917, which defied the orthodox Marxist understanding that socialist revolution would occur in the highly developed capitalist countries, Lenin advanced the theory of the weak link, which, after the fact, permitted the occurrence of the revolution in economically backward Russia by characterizing Russia as the weak link in the capitalist chain. The imperialist crisis of today reveals that Russia continues to be the weak link in the capitalist chain due to its inability to participate fully and directly in the parasitic capitalist world economy. Therefore, although the entire capitalist system has been in a state of crisis for some time now, with many of the colonial countries so indebted to US and European parasitism, they are incapable of holding up their so-called obligations to the industrialist capitalist countries, thereby threatening the stability of the international monetary system. It was the Soviets who capitulated first, before other European industrial societies, opting to join the capitalist world economy. Thus, the heirs to the first great attempt at socialism joined the feast of the flesh of the world's oppressed peoples in order to solve its own economic and political problems. Such a move sacrificing the long-term interests of the revolution for short-term benefits of a sector of the working class is defined as opportunism. Hence, the pathetic plea by Soviet President Gorbachev to join the International Monetary Fund and World Bank and to participate in the General Agreement on Taxes and Tariffs, or the International Monetary System, which, while experiencing the stress of a more diversified capitalist leadership, remains nevertheless a capitalist international monetary system used to further enslave the colonized world. Hence, the mad rush by the Russians and Eastern Europeans into the orgy of consumerism that characterizes their rich white kith and kin of Western Europe and the US, of North America. The domestic struggles against Russian and Eastern European communism continues to reveal itself as a struggle for the possession of things, VCRs, color TVs, and the like, that other white people long ago accepted as their just right due to them because of their whiteness. Via Lenin, the leader of the Russian Revolution of 1917, had begun to recognize some of the impediments to socialist revolution in Europe before his untimely death in 1924. While he had not come to understand the centrality of the anti-colonial revolutions of the world against the imperialist bourgeoisie, he did understand that the relationship the white workers of Europe and North America forged with the peoples suffering from colonialism would ultimately determine the revolutionary character of white workers. In his pamphlet, Imperialism and the Split in Socialism, Lenin spoke of the opportunists of his day 70 years ago. Lenin's words still hold true, not only for European and North American opportunists in general, but also for Russian East European opportunists as well. His words describe precisely what Gorbachev and the Eastern European leaders and peoples are about during this so-called crisis of socialism. And we quote Lenin here. The opportunists, social chauvinists, are working hand in glove with the imperialist bourgeoisie precisely toward creating an imperialist Europe on the backs of Asia and Africa. And objectively, the opportunists are a section of the petty bourgeoisie and of a certain strata of the working class who have been bribed out of imperialist super profits and converted into watchdogs of capitalism and corruptors of the labor movement. The problem is the child of capitalism, the proletariat rather, is the child of capitalism, of world capitalism, and not only of European capitalism. On a world scale, 50 years sooner or 50 years later, measured on a world scale, this is a minor point. The proletariat, of course, will be united, and revolutionary social democracy will inevitably be victorious within it. But that is not the point. By advocating unity with the opportunists, you are objectively defending the enslavement of the workers by the imperialist bourgeoisie with the aid of the best agents of the labor movement. The victory of revolutionary social democracy on a world scale is absolutely inevitable. Only it is moving and will move, is proceeding and will proceed against you. It will be a victory over you. On the one hand, there is the tendency of the bourgeoisie and the opportunists to convert a handful of very rich and privileged nations into eternal parasites on the body of the rest of mankind, to rest on the laurels of the exploitation of Negroes, Indians, etc., keeping them in subjection with the aid of the excellent weapons of extermination provided by modern militarism. On the other hand, there is the tendency of the masses, who are more oppressed than before, and who bear the whole brunt of imperialist wars, to cast off this yoke and overthrow the bourgeoisie, unquote. Russia, which lost its membership in the white capitalist world economy through the attempt by Russian revolutionaries to overthrow capitalism with the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, and which has no real colonies, Eastern Europe, some of which lost its colonial possessions and membership in white capitalist world economy through its association with the Soviet Union after the Second Imperialist World War, chose opportunism over revolution as a means of economic development. They are rushing to rejoin the white capitalist parasitic world economy, resting on the backs of Asia and Africa, and based on the exploitation of Negroes, Indians, etc., who are kept in subjection with the aid of the excellent weapons of extermination provided by modern militarism, unquote. Capitalist ideology, which is white racism, has long held that the origin of the world's political economy, especially the wealth of whites, is a consequence of hardworking, thrifty, and intellectually superior white people, the frugal elite that Marx talked about. However, the economic stagnation of Russia and East Europe, once it was no longer a part of the world's white capitalist parasitic economy, is evidence of where the real basis of international white capitalist development is located. So this whole line about intellectually superior and thriftier and all this white people, the frugal elite, being responsible for the status of Europe and the capitalist economy is deflated when you look at the economic stagnation of Russia and Eastern Europe when it no longer was a part of the world's white capitalist parasitic economy. You see that when you see what happened with Russia and what they call Eastern Europe or the Soviet Union, when they were cut out, when they were absolutely cut out of the ability to live at the expense of Africans and colonized peoples around the world, when they were isolated by the other capitalist powers, you get a sense of what will happen to the entire white world once it loses access to these stolen resources as well. Even the much touted 18th century revolution of Europe and North America that marked a turning point in the transformation of the entire white world, overthrowing European feudalism and introducing democracy and the capitalist mode of production that created both the modern white working class and its antipode, the white working class, that created the modern white ruling class and its antipode, the white working class, needed African slavery and Indian genocide as its foundation. The ability of the European merchant class to overthrow and replace the European nobility was based on the extra societal strength this fledgling social formation achieved through primitive accumulation. That accumulation of capital preceding capitalistic production, an accumulation not the result of the capitalist mode of production, but a starting point. The white capitalist parasitic world economy that the Russians and East Europeans are rushing to rejoin requires world slavery for its existence. Let me say that again. The white capitalist parasitic world economy that the Russians and Eastern Europeans are rushing to rejoin requires world slavery for its existence. And it's really important to understand that, because there are even Negroes who you will find in the barbershops who explain that capitalism is obviously superior, because you see people in what were formerly called socialist countries rushing to become capitalistic. But what we're saying here is that the white capitalist parasitic world economy that the Russians and Eastern Europeans are rushing to rejoin requires world slavery for its existence. And when the Soviet Union, under the leadership of V.I. Lenin, was a revolutionary state, it was because it fought for the existence of a world economy which would allow for the real producers, who are the toiling masses of the world, to commonly own and control the product of their common labor. Lenin fought for a worldwide movement of laborers, the workers, and all the toiling masses who would rise up and overthrow the capitalist system. This worldwide movement to overthrow capitalism is the only way the wretched conditions of the world's peoples can be permanently overcome. To the extent the subsequent Soviet government gave assistance to the worldwide struggles for national liberation, they contributed to the process which will ultimately overthrow capitalism and the basis of the economic contradictions currently being experienced by Russia and Eastern Europe. You know, immediately after the Russian Revolution, Lenin understood, and he was among a great number of Marxists and communists who did not believe in what would be characterized as socialism in one state. He recognized that in order for the Russian Revolution to succeed, it was going to be necessary for a socialist revolution to occur in other countries. And he assumed that was going to be in other European countries, Germany and England and places like that. But the thing is that he recognized that for socialism to occur, that the whole capitalist world, the whole capitalist economy had to be overturned, and that did not happen. And so Lenin fell back on a program that he called war socialism. And it was a form of state capitalism that was designed to protect the Soviet state, the socialist state that they had created at the expense of the workers' revolution that they had fought for, because historical conditions did not permit the advent of socialism, because the world capitalist economy, the world capitalist system continued to be the dominant system, dominant economy of the whole world, even after the Russian Revolution. There was not, the other countries did not join the Russian Revolution. It was not a worldwide revolution that thrust the workers to power around the world, which meant that the Soviet Union was now encircled by vicious capitalist pigs who would overturn any suggestion of the workers coming to power for what that meant to their power worldwide. So, however, the Russian and Eastern Europeans have chosen instead. We say to the extent the subsequent Soviet Union, Soviet governments gave assistance to the worldwide struggles for national liberation, they contributed to the process which will ultimately overthrow capitalism and the basis of the economic contradictions currently being experienced by Russia and Eastern Europe. However, the Russians and Eastern Europeans have chosen instead to abandon the cause of the wretched toilers of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the internal colonies of the white capitalist countries. They have chosen to join the privileged white world in its losing attempt to keep the parasitic pedestal of capitalists, which is to say white power, in place. In the case of China, whose heroic people made a great revolution which revealed the revolutionary possibilities of colonially oppressed peoples throughout the world, their current efforts at economic development have been characterized by our party as being like the efforts of someone trapped in a hole attempting to get out by climbing up on his own back. China is one of those countries whose level of economic development is directly tied to its history as host to European economic parasitism. The British Opium War constituted the blatant British capture of primitive accumulation through a drug trade that Britain forced on China. China's wretched condition of existence are therefore due to the same historical causes as those in the rest of Asia, as well as in Africa and Latin America. However, China's revolution in 1949 extricated China from its negative relationship with parasitic world capitalism and allowed China, like Russia before it, to make some immediate changes in the interests of the Chinese masses, although not without contradictions. China's current treacherous political collaboration with Western imperialism reflects the growing voluntary reintroduction of China into the capitalist world economy, although this time its current leadership intends for China to play the role of parasite instead of host. In other words, China also intends to transform its material conditions of existence, not through revolution to overthrow capitalism, but through joining imperialism at the trial. When you look at what's happening in China today and the contest that China is engaged in with the imperialist powers, and especially the United States, that's what we're looking at. This is a contest that we see increasingly occurring within capitalist or imperialist countries themselves. While the Russians, Eastern Europeans, and Chinese have in the past referred to themselves as socialist states, they have never actually presided over socialist economies, the historic basis for the existence of which continues to unfold even now. Therefore, the crises experienced by any or all of these economies have actually been crises inherent in capitalism and not in socialism. Moreover, the political crises experienced by any or all of these states are crises due in great measure to the inability of a capitalist economy to solve the problems in society. While the Soviets and China, to a lesser degree, have been actively involved with the US, Western, and Japanese imperialism in attempting to manage the world, to maintain what can only be called worldwide imperialist stability, their efforts will only prove to be futile as the oppressed and subject workers and peoples of the colonial world are not sympathetic to any deals made which would compromise our just struggle to overthrow our oppression and subjugation. Moreover, in spite of difficulties our struggles might experience due to the Soviet, East European, and Chinese defections, we will nevertheless see a rapid development of the independent struggle for national liberation now that they are unencumbered by Chinese and especially Soviet or Russian opportunism. The rising up of the slave, organized and armed, with the theory of African internationalism and poised for the final defeat of the parasitic world capitalist system, marks a new page in world history. I just want to say that we really recognized some time ago that while many people were fretting the consequences of the collapse of what might have been called the Soviet Union, and particularly the Soviet Union, because the Chinese, having some influence, was never as influential in the struggles around the world as the Soviets were. The Chinese had far fewer resources that they could contribute to fledgling revolutionary movements worldwide, except ideological resources. And we said that instead of movements being crushed by the fact that they were no longer getting resources from the Soviet Union, the reality is that Soviet opportunism, which often created organizations in colonial countries and dominated those countries and subjected the movements in those countries to the interests of the Soviet Union, the Soviet state, which meant that the Soviet Union had the ability of using these movements in a fashion that would give them leverage in debates and struggles with England, with the United States, etc. And whether that was in Palestine or any other place, it was something to the advantage of the Soviet state. But once the Soviet Union collapsed, all of these groups that were propped up by the Soviet Union in these different countries would lose their significance, and movements of the people would emerge and explode around the world. And that's what we've seen. So that's why you've seen, like, around the world, you don't see in Afghanistan or Iraq, people who are quoting Lenin or Marx or anything like that. They are chanting Allah Akbar and things like that. They have fallen back on familiar and sometimes religiously informed practices in politics, but it has unleashed a massive struggle all around the world, and that destabilizes the entire imperialist system, and in a far greater fashion than what had happened when the whole the U.S. and the Soviet Union and China were engaged in managing the world in a fashion that would be beneficial to their own states. So, and that's why we say that right now, and we said it then in 1990, that the time is ripe for the pursuit of African internationalism, to take that to the oppressed of the world, that would help to inform revolutionary struggle everywhere, and to initiate revolutionary struggle everywhere, to liberate Africa. And this is a part of the whole worldwide struggle against capitalist imperialism, which has its foundation in the enslavement and trade in Black people and colonialism, and offer us the first time in history the real material basis for the rise of socialism and the workers of the world to be able to seize power in our own interests. So having said that, I would like to go ahead and open it up for discussions. And we've left plenty of time for discussion, and I'm hoping that people will join in and let's talk about this, because, again, this is not the discussion that you're going to get in your local meetings to have a demonstration against this or that. The objective of the party is to build a real organization of forces, of advanced cadre, people who can provide leadership for mass struggles wherever they occur in the world, and not just leadership for mass struggles in general, but leadership for mass struggles that would contribute to masses of African people, working class African people, understanding that the particular kinds of contradictions we are confronted with simply exposes or reveals the contradiction of a whole social system that came out of slavery, and that helping people to reach revolutionary conclusions, that's part of what our real responsibility is. And that's not to be misunderstood with saying that we do not struggle around critical questions that we are confronted with on a daily basis, wherever we're located in this world, within the United States itself. Right now, I know, for example, there has been over the last several days struggle in St. Louis in one of the jails there, where the people were locked in steaming prison cells without any air. Sometimes where the temperature is more than 110 degrees, and the prisoners have been yelling out of the windows, and some of that's been captured by social media, help me, help us, etc. And we have a responsibility to jump into that struggle, to do everything we can to push the state back, to force some relief so that those people will not die like dogs in those prison cells. So we call attention to it, and then to help expose the fact that prisons simply function as a means of colonial coercion. And this is why as we struggle against this current situation, as we struggle to provide some kind of relief for the people who are locked up in those pens right now, we explain this is why there must be revolution, why Africans must have self-determination, why we cannot rely on the United States government that came into existence in part through enslaving Africans and killing the indigenous people. Say we cannot allow a future to remain in their hands. That's why we have a responsibility to make a revolution. So what I want to do now is open it up for further discussions, and I would call on everybody to join in. We have a reasonable amount of time for this discussion if the people who are participating in this study are not bashful and are willing, like to pursue a deeper understanding about the nature of the beast that we're struggling with and the contours of the contradictions that we are confronted with here and around the world. Uhuru. So, yeah.
Uhuru, Chairman, this is Dia. And first, I just really want to appreciate the study and, the opportunity to have this discussion, and especially how this passage, it highlights the contradiction of, the Russian Revolution and the fact that, it was basically based on the fact that the struggle was between the white bourgeoisie and the white workers. And, just how it states that, that isn't the question of, of what's really going on. It's the struggle for, African and other oppressed people who are fighting to get their resources back. And just like the pitfalls that we experience, as to come to an understanding of what's like really happening and how it's so easy for us to adapt these theories that aren't on a revolutionary trajectory. And yeah, I just really want to say how great it is for this piece to highlight that. But in the beginning of the piece where you speak to about, and I'll read it, when it says—
Before you go there, hold on, I want to get to that. I think what's really important for us to understand is that the Russian Revolution was not something that was conscious of fighting for the power of the white workers against the white bourgeoisie. The Russian Revolution, led by V.I. Lenin, assumed that it was playing a really important role in the overthrow of international capitalism, which came into existence through slavery and colonialism. It was an honest revolution that had contradictions like other revolutions have had contradictions. So it was not conscious of doing that. Its weakness was that it did not recognize that key to the overthrow of capitalism was the overthrow of the pedestal of slavery and colonialism upon which capitalism rested. And that's why, for all of what it attempted to do, it was incapable of carrying out its mission. That's one of the reasons. That's the most significant reason. But there are other reasons that were attached to that. And that was how the entire capitalist work, because their theory was based on the assumption that it would be the development of the industrialized societies and economies, which means white. That's how it can be translated. That would result in the emergence of capitalism, of socialism rather, as a world economy. That capitalism would be overthrown as a world economy by the success of the industrial working class, and that didn't happen, and it couldn't happen, and it couldn't happen because of the weakness of the theory, where most of the Marxists were unable to see that the critical force that would destroy capitalism, the whole edifice, was the pedestal that it rested on, which was slavery and colonialism. And as you saw from some of the quotes I made from Lenin, he was beginning to recognize some things about that, and how, you know, countries were trying to live off something of the Negroes and Indians and etc., using, becoming parasites. I mean, he was able to see some of that. He wasn't able to conclude. And if you read anything by Lenin, about Lenin, you see that as he lived more and more, he began to see more and more the significance of the anti-colonial struggles, but he didn't come to the same conclusion we've come to. And and he did not understand ultimately that the basis of opportunism was to be found in the inability of the white communist socialists to see that everything that existed in the white world, as he mentioned, and Lenin mentions here, that the proletariat and the ruling class were products, of this of the same historical processes. So I just wanted to say that, because I think there's a way that we can have this discussion today that is not necessarily helpful, because it presupposes that white and blackness, without seeing much about all of the historical bases that are in motion that even help to define stuff as white and black. We talked earlier on about the material basis of a society of slavery and colonialism being responsible for the superstructure, which is the ideas in the society, and the ideas in society about white people, black people, etc., or their existence to an economic base of slavery and colonialism. This is what gives life and dynamism to those ideas. So I just wanted to say that, because I think we're in a place now where there's a lot of careless discussion without people understanding a damn thing about the science of society, and about the process that got us to be in this place. And that's what you and I are struggling for. That's why we're having this discussion, trying to win greater participation. We want to create African internationalist revolutionaries, not just people who can lead a demonstration and chant and lead, be chant leaders, etc. So, excuse me, comrade.
In saying that and in understanding that, how is it understanding how the contradictions have even deepened since then up until now, and how we see that Africans are struggling to understand the crisis of imperialism and things of that nature. How is it that they can avoid adopting these theories and these theories that don't you have this revolutionary trajectory that we're speaking to?
Well, right up. The thing that we got to say is theory is really important. It is a precondition for successful revolution. It really is theory. Like advanced revolutionary theory, and that's played cheap. We go to meetings all the time, conferences and everything, where everybody talks about stuff and they have analyses, but the analyses are not even based on some firm theoretical foundation, just general opposition to capitalism without recognizing that the fundamental opponent to capitalism is socialism. How do you get socialism? You destroy the pedestal of capitalism, which is what? Slavery and colonialism, right? And but nobody's having that discussion, and therefore they can't see the victory of African revolution. They can't see the victory of socialism. They can only criticize capitalism for the bad things that it does. They can criticize capitalist policies, imperialist policies. They can criticize war, but they cannot call for the overthrow or the overturn of the whole social system. They do not create organizations with that in mind. They should join the African People's Socialist Party. Frankly, that's what they should do, because the party is not just a talk fest. It is an organization that has been pulled together for the actual purpose of seizing political power and exercising political power, especially over free and independent Africa and African people around the world, as a part of the international struggle to defeat capitalism, imperialism, and to bring into existence of a new world where people are not oppressing and exploiting each other. So they should join the African People's Socialist Party, or if they can find another revolutionary formation that understands the world in the fashion that we are talking about now, and the basis of the contradictions that we're confronted with, that gives them the ability to fight not just around symptoms, but to be able to say this is the end to which we are fighting. I'm saying imperialism can be defeated, that it must be defeated, that capitalism, which is based on exploitation, slavery, colonialism, that it has to go, that there can be no future. And I'm saying more than that. I'm saying that we see evidence of this system right before our very eyes dying or being killed by the resistance of the people, and that many people who do not understand and who are not a part of a process by which the workers will take power are frightened by this, even if they are people who are oppressed. They are frightened by this because it looks to them as if the whole world is out of hand. And we're saying that we can bring it into hand, but it takes human beings who are organized into revolutionary organization with revolutionary theory that's working. Primary task is to take power and to exercise power in the interest of the working class and the oppressed masses of the world.
I just got one. I'm sorry, I don't mean to take up too much time. I just have one more thing. In the passage where it says, in another place in part 8 of Capital, Marx further explains what this primitive accumulation is that
was not the result of capitalist mode of production, but a starting point.
Yes, right? Can you deepen that? Because I'm having trouble understanding.
Well, the thing is that Marx wrote in Capital, he mentioned this whole issue of primitive accumulation. And the question of primitive accumulation addresses the fundamental question that you and I and all Black people at one time or another have had to ask. When we look around the world and we see that Black people, no matter where we live, are poor and catching hell everywhere. And that's not a place on the planet Earth where you can look that Black people are not catching hell. And not just catching hell, but nasty hell. I mean, like in the crudest, blatant, disgusting form on the one hand. But every place you look in the world, white people are living well off, even poor white people, even white people in Appalachians. When you compare, when you look at even Eastern Europe, that used to really blow our minds when the people in Eastern Europe were so opposed to their oppression and exploitation. You looked at these guys, they were working around with fur coats and they were living so much better than the rest of us. So the question that we had to confront was, well, how did it get to be this way? How is it that white people got everything and Black people got nothing? And of course, the explanation you and I've got in the past is because white people are smarter, thriftier, more civilized, more religious and stuff like that. And that's a phony explanation. The real explanation is slavery and colonialism, that the white world suffering at a particular time in history from horrible disease and a horrible social system called feudalism, set out and began attacking other forces in the world and accumulating wealth as human beings who work for free and stuff like that. And that's how they accumulated wealth. This was the primitive accumulation, the start of capital, the attack on China that turned China into a nation of junkies, of drug addicts, that brought tremendous amount of wealth into what was previously a starving, disease-ridden Europe. The fact is where we are now in this place called America. White people didn't have homes in England. They didn't have homes in Europe and stuff like that. Now they come and steal everybody's land. They got everything, all of this property, everything that you see is a consequence of somebody stealing. That is primitive accumulation. That is the startup of capital that came at our expense, the expense of the so-called Indians, the expense of the Mexicans, the expense of people all around the world. That's the starting point of the entire thing. So that's what we talk about. When we, and here, Marx talks in Capital. And Capital, of course, is this book that seldom read, but often quoted, mentioned, where he says that the discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and the entombment in mines of the aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, signalized the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. This is how it all got started. That's what he's saying. All of it got started off this, and we go further than that. We say it got started off this, and that this historical relationship has continued up to now, where the white world has been sucking resources out of Africa, out of Asia, out of Mexico, out of the Americas and every place else. And that's the foundation of the system. That's why we're not upset when we see the economy gets bad, when we recognize the economy is bad because they can't steal as much as they used to steal in Afghanistan or Venezuela or some other place like that. We see a system that was born of slavery and parasitism is now under assault. And the responsibility that we have is to deepen that crisis and have our own program and our own organized capacity to take power over our lives away from a white social system that is shaky now and less capable of advancing its own interests than we've ever seen before. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yes, that was very helpful, Chairman. Uhuru.
Yeah. So, yeah, somebody else was saying something?
Yeah, Chairman, this is Rafiq.
Where are you, Rafiq?
I'm hoping you can hear me.
Where are you, Rafiq? Where are you calling from, Rafiq?
In Brooklyn.
Okay, go ahead. Yes, I hear you, Rafiq. Go ahead.
Considering, all right, China used to be under Mao and all that. That whole socialism, that's over. With Russia. Considering, all right, Russia has satellites too, like in the Middle East and Eastern Europe and so on and so forth. Right, with the advent and the bum rush of the African revolution, pushing socialism throughout throughout the entire diaspora, you think that Russia, real talk, would align itself with our revolution in solidarity with socialism, or you think that they would consider their whiteness and their interest as a European country, a white-led country, and flip? I mean, what do you think? Because you've been to different places in the world, and you know the history. What do you think would be more? What do you think would happen in a situation where Russia was confronted with us emerging as a world force under socialism? We think they would align themselves with us on the basis of socialism, or would they take into consideration their whiteness? To some degree.
I don't think they're taking into consideration their whiteness. I think they're taking into consideration their economic interests. That's what it's doing right now. When the Russians have invited us to come to Russia, it's because it's in a big struggle with the United States. And it recognized this is its interest, its economic, geopolitical, geostrategical interest is to win as many friends as it can in this opposition, in the struggle that it has with the United States. I think that's what it will do, because its whiteness does not keep it from trying to forge a relationship with China. It's forging a relationship based on its interests and then based on the what it sees as the ability of any force to contribute to its capacity to realize its own interests. And that's what you and I have to do. But you can't do that unless you know what your interests are. We have to know what our interests are. And then we forge relationships in the world based on that also. But the bigger thing is that Russia is a capitalist country. The Russians, the ones who are in power now, are opposed to socialism. You go to Russia today, And you see evidence of the fact that it's a capitalist country. But it's not the same capitalist country as England or the United States. And there are a number of historically based reasons for that. There's no number of historically based reasons for Putin and many of the intellectuals who are in Russia today to begin refer to themselves as Eurasians, not just Europeans. This goes back far in history and how capitalism itself came into existence. And also, you got to remember that Russia did not go through, it was not even allowed to go through a period of capitalist production that stemmed from slavery and colonialism, as did the so-called Western white countries. It almost moved almost directly from feudalism to socialism. It had a brief fling with emergent capitalism, but they were overthrown really quickly, and socialist state came into existence, which is not to say that the Russians don't have the same kind of attitudes as the dominant white world has. But not only do Russians have that attitude, people around the world see black people a certain way based on how we've been defined by white power, which is a consequence of white power having power and we not having power to engage in discussion of who the hell we are. And at different times in history, much of the world has been able to respect us, particularly during the 60s at the heart, during the height of the Black Revolution, not only in the United States, but around the world. Then people saw us as a real force and they respected us. And then you saw more black people who were happy to be black and happy to be Africans than you see now, today. And as this movement grows, not only Russians, but black people ourselves will have a better relationship with blackness. Anybody else?
We do have okay, we have a question from Facebook, but the person on the phone can go first.
Yes, on the phone. Uhudu.
Chairman, this is Jackson in Opportunism, Florida. And I was going to say more on how prisons simply function as a means of colonial coercion, on how prisons work to coerce colonized people, sorry.
Listening to this can understand you better than I did not understand what you said. I know this is Jackson from St. Petersburg, Florida, but I didn't understand anything else you said. And maybe it's hearing impairment on my part, but I think it's a little more complex than that. Can you repeat what you said? And I'm looking at the engineer with daggers in my eyes. And so go ahead. What did you say, Jackson?
I believe you said earlier that prisons simply function as a means of colonial coercion. And I was wondering if you could say more on how prisons function as a means of colonial coercion.
Prisons, yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you raised that, because in this country in particular, when I say this country, I mean the United States, it is something that's exposed just even with law. As you know, that Africans in modern history were introduced to this country as captives. And this was illegal. The enslavement of African people was legal. It wasn't something that some bandits did it and the government didn't know it was going on. It was legal. And so it was because of it brought tremendous amount of wealth. Tremendous. It's unthinkable. You can't even really accurately calculate the amount of wealth that came from the enslavement of African people. So it was profound. And the resistance of African people made such production untenable at a particular time in history. And also it led the development, the amount of wealth that was accumulated created new kinds of social forces in America itself that ultimately the combination of a lot of forces led to war inside this country that they refer to as a civil war, and the formal end of slavery, But the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, they amended the Constitution of the United States, and that 13th Amendment that legally ended slavery also indicated that slavery was prohibited except as punishment for a crime. And so hence you see at this point, the colonial slaves become re-enslaved. I mean, the legal slavery as it existed before now is ended, and then become re-enslaved. You should have one law, one amendment to the Constitution ending slavery in one form and introducing slavery in another form, except for punishment of a crime. And then what you see immediately associated with that is a whole battery of laws that would guarantee that African people would be the criminals. And then secondly, of laws that would prohibit African people from having power within the legal system, or if not prohibit, inhibit, so that nobody could run for office, if could vote if they were felons. They couldn't hold office if they were felons, and so this is what we say. And then what you see is at different times, especially of crisis, huge numbers of African people pushed into the prison system, pushed legally into the prison system, and often illegally, because tradition sometimes prevails even over law. So we say that the prison system really functions as an institution of colonial oppression, and which, yeah, that's I'll leave it there for the time being. But there's a lot more that can be said, and I hope it was helpful. Uhuru.
Stop. Yes, well, Chairman.
Uhuru, comrade.
I have just a quick question.
This is Louise calling from London.
Yes, sir. What's my question? I want to ask a question regarding the Trotsky and the white left, which does not recognize the colonization or colonialism as the basis, as the pedestal upon which the whole edifice rests. They come with an explanation that Stalin deviated from the real revolution, and they say that they are for permanent revolution of Trotsky.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that, Chairman?
I appreciated Trotsky's introduction of the concept of permanent revolution, which was something that was dissatisfied with the notion of revolution in one country. And so that was really important, I think, that what Trotsky said. But the Trotsky still does not get to the essential question that Marx raised before Trotsky was born, that question being how, and Trotsky, I'm mentioning this because Trotsky called himself a Marxist. He was a very brilliant man. He was quite erudite, one of the most brilliant people in the how many forces we might have lost in this process, whether we have ways is still on or not. We lost the internet. That's what happened. We lost access to the internet. So is there anyone else who wants to join?
I don't think there is, because there was a Skype.
So, but we still on the phone now. Is that all the phone was Skype? All the phone was Skyping?
Yeah, the phone was internet. Skype.
I didn't know that we were only Skyping. I mean, only doing phone through Skype, because we used to do phones. Yeah, so we don't have any other phone,
No.
any other phone devices.
I do. We still have questions from Facebook, and that's still going right now. So let me check that out. We have a question from Roger. Roger Williams. I'm not sure where he's from, but he asks, capitalism, as you've been telling us, is under severe stress. What do you envision African world will look like on the other side of this? So what would you?
It depends on what you do, Roger. But I think that we have it within our capacity to define the new world that we want. That it won't happen, through some religious occurrence, something to that effect. That we build a revolutionary party that engage in deconstructing, based on exploitation and oppression, and create a system where the workers who for social production are also have social ownership of the means of production. We will see an explosion, among other things, of African culture that is not inhibited by the constraints of white nationalist bourgeoisie. I think that we will see an explosion of African production. We now have access, since the economy is not organized around providing goods for Europe and for America. We can start building infrastructure in Africa, attacking the mosquito that causes so much damage, malaria and other kinds of disease. We can begin to build schools and hospitals, which is impossible because imperialist countries control our economies. We have now a common economy crossing the whole continent of Africa, and that also includes pockets in the rest of the world, here, Brazil, Haiti, Jamaica, and other places like that, where there's open movement across borders by African people to every area of the African world. In particular, we establish relationships with other countries now who have also been liberated from imperialist colonial domination, partially as a consequence of the power and strength and influence of the African Revolution, which gives us the ability to create a common economy. Just think about this. You've got 12 million square miles of wealth, rich, and millions, hundreds of millions of workers who are currently, many of whom are currently unemployed or underemployed, who are now in motion and providing the kinds of resources that we need to solve our own problems and then to engage in relationship with other countries. It's hard to imagine what our possibilities are, but they are great. And especially on the cultural level, but also production. I mean, how many people can't go to school because they're Black and poor? How many people can't become scientists, doctors, engineers, and all these other things because of constraints placed on us by imperialist white power? We unleash all these forces. We have schools, hospitals, and things like that that serve us. And I'm telling you, you're going to see a greatest leap in humanity in one generation. You will see a massive transformation of the world economy and the conditions of Africans and other people in the world, because science is not limited to a particular continent or a particular country. Once we begin this process of allowing everybody to have education, you will see the disappearance of cancers, and it won't just impact Africa, it impact the world. You find an end to economic competition between countries that also contribute to the basis of wars and stuff like that. It's an entirely different world we're looking at on the other side of imperialism. Is there anybody else? But this relies on human activity. It relies on people who want to see this happening, joining the African People's Socialist Party, contributing to make a revolution. It won't happen any other way.
Oh, Chairman, we have another question from Facebook. Nyabingi Fugasai from Houston. Chairman, you always speak to how Africans here in America are strategically placed in the belly of the beast. Can you speak to how significant a united front of the Black liberation movement here in America is critical to a global revolution of African and other oppressed people?
Well, I can't say how the United Front is critical. Because the United Front can be a good thing, but if it's a United Front we have a responsibility of recognizing that a united front has a class character to it as well. And the fact that it's a united front means that it crosses class lines and what have you. Otherwise, most people would be in the same revolutionary organization. But I do believe that the African working class has a responsibility to unite as much as we can of the entire African nation to forward this revolutionary struggle. But the African working class also is an international force. It's not just something that's located in the United States. I think that the greater strength of the African revolution will be predetermined by the relationship that we have with other African revolutionaries stretched throughout the world as a part of the African Socialist International. To be able to move the African world in the same strategic trajectory under the leadership of the African working class, that's the critical thing. And in the process of doing that, we can forge united fronts and coalitions and other things. But the critical thing is the development of the Revolutionary Party, the advanced attachment of the African working class, so that the class interests of the workers and peasants are at the center of everything that we do. Because the African petty bourgeoisie that comes into a united front has unity with not only the African petty bourgeoisie, but often with the petty bourgeoisie of other countries, and they are better organized, they got more resources than we have. So it's critical that the African working class achieves maximum unity in the form of a revolutionary political party with our own program, and that program is what guides us in our relationship with anybody else with whom we might build united fronts. There are some people who we know and who we have worked with in the past, and they see the critical task as building a united front. Is to what end? At the end of the day, what is the objective? Is it simply to have a united front or say, well, we have to free the Black people? Well, we've seen united fronts freeing Black people. We've called them Congress, like the African National, the ANC, the African National Congress. We've seen them as fronts and things like that all over Africa. But the workers and the poor peasants have never had their situation improved because we did not have our own independent political parties that function within those fronts to provide leadership for those fronts, certainly representing the interests of the class. That's the critical question. That's the profound thing that we have to take on and make happen. That's why we have these studies right here, so that our class is armed ideologically and can engage in building fronts and anything else that we want to do. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, we have another question. This one is from YouTube. Danny Bo 626. In the aftermath of the catastrophic Grenfell fire, can you also speak on the use of gentrification as a means to continue oppression of the colonized people?
Gentrification is a reflection of a powerlessness of African people that stems from a lack of organization and ideological clarity. When we are organized, we can push them back. We can defeat them. They can't do all the things they do. We don't necessarily have to have state power to be able to wield a fierce struggle with them. But when you don't have that, then we find ourselves being moved around the way the oppressors want to move us around. And you talk about what happened in the United States with that horrific fire. You're talking about a people that was disarmed. They rely on the opportunist Labour Party and other organizations like that in England, and as the way forward, and don't build revolutionary organization again with taking power at the center of what it is they're about for the working class. And that's what we have to do. And because you will find that it's not just the white bourgeoisie in England or in the United States that gets a lot of money, make a lot of resources of gentrification. They create policies collectively. The different parties, the different interests, economic interests, create these policies that push us from one community to the other community, put us in these rotting hellholes that are dangerous, etc. And then they gentrify us out of existence. They're continuously manipulating us so that we do not have a potential capacity for accumulating economic or political power. And so our task has to be organize our class, and we do this through participating in struggles around questions like what happened in the United Kingdom, and even like I was mentioning earlier, the struggle that happened that's going on right now in St. Louis around that jail where they got these people in this ovens, Africans and other people in this ovens. We struggle for power, and that's the way we fight ultimately against gentrification. But we suffer gentrification all over the world. In Africa, we see massive amounts of capital coming into Africa, buying up properties and what have you, where the African people ourselves do not have access to property. It's happening in the United States. It's happening everywhere in the United States. Just looking at St. Louis area, where we see big corporations, some of them international corporations, coming up, buying up housing stock where Africans cannot afford to live anymore. They are the ones who create the conditions where people have to default on their taxes, have their lands, their homes taken from them. They are the ones who use code enforcement in a fashion that will allow the cities, the municipalities to take the properties of people, and especially from older African women. They make these as policies, and then you have sometimes just middle-class white guys, or sometimes upper working-class white guys who ride around our communities, certainly in the United States, and they pick up trucks with their clipboards, and they're buying up everything because they have a special relationship with the banks who will loan them money that they can then use to buy up properties that we've been pushed out of, et cetera, et cetera. So gentrification is a crucial question, especially for colonized people here and around the world. So I know we got to get out of here. And there are a few things that we need to announce on the way out of here, and they include that. Go ahead. You want to say something, Cameron?
Yes, we have the BIB going on.
That's the Black Coalition of Social Justice, Peace, and Reparation, having its annual conference in Chicago, Illinois, at Chicago State University, August 12th and 13th. It's really important for you to get there. You can find out more information on that by going to blackcoalition.org. And the title for this conference is The Ballot and the Bullet, Elections, War, and Peace During the Era of Donald Trump. Going to have a lot of important people who are talking there, and I expect to be there as well. I also want to let you know that in September, I think it's the 16th and 17th. What is the date? September, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement will be conducting its conference, its convention, rather. It's going to be a really important convention that deals with the critical issue of organization for African people. That's going to be happening in St. Louis, Missouri. And I think the date for that, September 16th and 17th. I think that's the date for that. Is that me with that? It's the 16th and 17th of September. So people can get more information by going to INPDUM. Is that INPDUM.org. Those are some crucial dates that you should look at. I really would like for a lot of you to accompany me in December. We're going to be having Marcus Garvey Legacy Cruise. It's a fundraiser for the African Socialist International, the international work that we do as a party throughout the African world. And that's going to be from December 9th. Is that December 9th? Somebody help me. December 9th through the 16th. December 9th through the 16th. You can get more information on that by going to where? How do we find that? MarcusGarveyLegacyCruise.org, I'm told. MarcusGarveyLegacyCruise.org. And that's the same name for the Facebook page. So please get information on that. And I look forward to being able to further this discussion of political education. I just want to remind people that the objective here is to really build revolutionary aptitude, especially in the African People's Socialist Party and throughout the African community. I think that people who attend these studies and some of the other things that we're doing are probably among the educated sectors of the African community anywhere. These are really important discussions, and I hope that people do not take them cheaply because we have to get away from a simple kind of race nationalism or the black man this and the white man that doesn't require any study, any investigation, just simple bromides. And I guarantee you that when we build our schools and universities, it won't be the only objective that we're fighting for. In fact, we build these things even as we make this revolutionary process. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and I want to remind you that you should contribute to blackpower96.org, Black Power 96.3, the WBPU FM radio station located in St. Petersburg, Florida. You can get our app get the app at Black Power. Go to Black Power 96. It's the first app that comes up, I'm told. And you can participate with us any place in the world. So I look forward to talking to you again next Sunday. Uhuru, adelante siempre.